The carriage was running her down. She heard the horses before she felt them. The wet drum of shod hooves on London cobble, closer with every heartbeat, and the driver shouting a curse that arrived too late to be a warning. She had stepped off the curb at Fleet because a man selling meat pies had shoved her aside, and now she stood in a rut of autumn rain with her cane held crosswise like a foolish shield, and the team was nearly on her. A hand closed around her wrist, not gentle, a grip like a blacksmith's, and an arm at her waist that lifted her clear of the ground as if she weighed no more than a letter. Hooves struck the cobble where she had stood. The carriage wheel hissed past her skirt. A second hand braced against the small of her back and turned her, hard, into the shelter of a doorway. The doorway smelt of boot-black and chimney smoke, and the specific metallic dampness of old London brick in the rain. Her cane was gone. She heard it clatter into the gutter some feet away. Her bonnet was askew. Rain had found the back of her neck and was tracing a cold line down between her shoulder blades. Her pulse was doing the thing her pulse did when her body had understood something before her mind had caught up. She kept her chin up. She had learnt, years ago, that lifting the chin was the first and cheapest defense a blind woman possessed against a world that expected her to cringe. She could not see him. She had not been able to see anyone for 15 years, but she could feel that he had stopped moving. "Drive on," he said, over her head, to someone she guessed was the driver. His voice was low and controlled and furious. "If you strike a foot passenger again on my account, you will find other employment. Walk the team to the square and wait." Hooves moved off. Rain drummed the brim of a hat somewhere above her. The grip on her wrist had not loosened. "You are trembling," he said, quieter. The fury had been put somewhere behind his teeth and not erased. "It is cold," she said. It was not cold. She did not know why she had said it. He released her wrist. She felt him step back a pace, exactly a pace, as if a ruler had measured it. And then she felt him go very still. The stillness lasted too long. She counted 4 breaths before she tilted her head toward where his face should be. "Sir," she said, "have you lost something?" "I beg your pardon?" "You have gone still. People go still when they have lost something, or found it. Which is it?" For the length of another breath, he did not answer. Then he said, in a voice she would later understand was the voice he used when something in his chest was trying to kill him. "Neither. My apologies. Are you hurt?" "I have not been run over, thanks to you." "Thanks to my driver's carelessness, more accurately." A pause. "I will see you home. Where do you live?" "I do not live anywhere tonight, sir." She kept her chin up because she had learned that the alternative was worse. "I had a room at an inn by Temple Bar. The landlord has rented it to a gentleman who needed it more than I did." "Your people?" "I have none living." "Your name?" She hesitated. She was accustomed to men asking her name, and she was accustomed to deciding which name to give. But something in his voice, the flat, careful precision of someone holding a glass that was already cracked, made her offer the true one. "Isolde Carey." He did not answer. The silence this time was not the silence of a man who had lost something. It was the silence of a man who had just put his hand through a door and was deciding whether to show it. "Isolde," he said slowly. "Carey." She said yes. The rain was louder in the doorway now. A cart rolled past on the cobbles. "Miss Carey, I'm going to ask you to come with me. Before you refuse, understand that I am not offering you a position, and I am not offering you my bed. I am offering you a dry room for 1 night, and a meal and the use of a bath, and a decision made in the morning by the light of a fire." "I do not know you." "No," he agreed. "You do not. But a carriage just tried to run down a blind woman in Fleet Street, and I was the man who pulled her from under the wheels. And I cannot put you back on the curb and walk away. I can put you in my carriage and hand you to my housekeeper by 9 o'clock and trouble you no further than that. If tomorrow you wish to leave, I will pay the first month's lodging at a better house than the one that turned you out." "You are very certain of my answer, sir." "I am very certain of what I am offering." She waited. She had learned in 15 years of darkness to listen for the places where a man's voice lied. His did not lie. It was doing something else, something she could not name, but it did not lie. "Your name," she said, "is a poor recommendation to a woman considering a carriage ride, Miss Carey. My servants will give it to you by the time we reach Grosvenor Square, if you wish to be told." She pressed. "Sir," she said. He answered, yes. She would like to be told now. Another pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. "Ashworth," he said, and she heard a man who had been named and had not enjoyed the naming. Edmund Ashworth. That, she told him, was not a poor recommendation. That was a very large recommendation. It was a name, he said. A name was not a character. She considered him for a long moment by the only means available to her. Rain on his coat, fine wool, heavy, well made. Breathing, steady, too steady. A man who had trained himself not to sound out of breath. Height, above her by a hand and a half. Hands, warm, very warm for an autumn night. And the stillness when she had spoken her name, that stillness had still not been accounted for. "Your Grace," she said, "I will accept one night." "You heard me before I had admitted it." Your driver hesitated before he apologized. A man working for a gentleman apologizes. A man working for a duke waits for permission. I heard the waiting. "I see." "No, sir, but I listen." He offered his arm. She found it by feel, the wool of his sleeve, and beneath it an arm that was solid, a working arm, not a drawing-room arm. He led her to the carriage and handed her up and gave the order to drive on, and the door shut behind them with the quiet click of a latch that had been oiled that morning. She sat with her cane across her knees and her hands folded, very careful, and listened to him breathe. He was still not breathing the way a man breathes on an ordinary night. And then, very softly, as if to himself, Edmund Ashworth said, 15 years. "What was that, Your Grace?" "Nothing, Miss Carey. A thought I have been carrying, and have now set down." The carriage rattled west. Ashworth House stood on the south side of Grosvenor Square, and the first thing Isolde noticed as she was handed through the door was that the hall was warm to the hand and silent. Warm in the old way, she thought. Coal fires kept up through the night, not the hasty blaze a house lit when an unexpected guest had been announced. Under her boots, the marble gave a dry, resonant sound that told her of a great volume of space overhead. A double-height hall, she guessed, with a staircase that turned twice. Beeswax on the wainscot, cedar on the stair. The particular iron cold of old brass polished within the hour. Servants moved, but none of them spoke. A good house, she thought. The ones that beat their staff shouted. The ones that were beaten shouted more. The ones that ran because the master liked them were quiet. In 9 years of making her bread at other people's pianos, she had learned to take the temperature of a household by its first 5 minutes of silence. And this house's silence was the silence of a place that had grown used to running well without being praised for it. "Mrs. Penrose," the Duke said. A woman's voice answered from her left. "Your Grace?" "This is Miss Isolde Carey. She will be my guest for tonight and possibly longer. The Rose Room. A fire, a bath, something she can eat without wishing she had not. In the morning she will decide whether she wishes to remain, and I will abide by her decision. Until she has decided, she is under this house's protection as if she were my own sister." A pause. Mrs. Penrose's voice, when it came, was not the voice of an instructed servant. It was the voice of a woman who had just looked at something and had to make her face obey her. "Very good, Your Grace." He gave a second, quieter instruction to his housekeeper. If Miss Carey asked anything about the household, Mrs. Penrose was to answer her. He would not have a woman in his house who was unable to ask. The housekeeper's assent was very soft. His footsteps moved away. Isolde heard him cross the hall, heard a door, heard a second door, and then heard the specific, heavy silence of a man who had gone into a library and shut himself inside it. She catalogued that footstep pattern the way another woman might have catalogued a face. "Miss Carey," said Mrs. Penrose, close now, and her voice had done what her face had had to do, obeyed her. "If you will come with me." Isolde found the housekeeper's arm. Mrs. Penrose's hand closed over hers, and then, very briefly, tightened, as if a woman had grasped a railing that had reminded her of something she thought long gone. The hand loosened again. They walked. Isolde asked, because it was easier to speak than to listen to her own pulse, how long the housekeeper had been with His Grace. 28 years was the answer. 18 at Ashfield in Kent before coming up to London. Ashfield, she understood, was the family seat. A house with a history, Isolde said mildly. Mrs. Penrose's step missed a beat on the last stair of the first flight. Only one. Isolde heard it. All old houses had histories, Mrs. Penrose said. Some, Isolde replied, had more history than others. The housekeeper did not answer that. They climbed a staircase. The carpet was thick and new. The banister beneath her hand was old, smoothed by a generation of palms. On the landing, Mrs. Penrose paused, and then, in a voice so quiet that even Isolde's trained ear almost missed it, said, "Miss, forgive me. Would you tell me again what name His Grace gave for you?" "Isolde Carey." "Thank you, miss." The housekeeper walked on, but Isolde heard that she was not breathing quite evenly, and filed that, too, away. The room was warm, and the bath was hot, and a tray arrived and was eaten without commentary. Afterwards, Isolde sat by the fire in a borrowed wrapper and listened to the house settle around her. Somewhere below, she heard a door, the library door, open and shut, and a single pair of footsteps cross the hall, and a second door shut, and then the soft, distinct sound of a key turned in a lock. A man locking himself into a room. She waited. The house kept its counsel. The fire shifted. A log rolled. A maid went past with another coal scuttle and did not knock. After a while, Isolde rose and found her cane and walked, slowly, the length of her room, counting paces and noting the places where the floorboards creaked and the places where they did not. 11 paces from wall to wall. The bed at her right, 3 paces from the fire. A writing table at her left under the window. A chair, another chair, a dresser, a mirror she could not use. She was being installed. That was the word for it. She had been handed through a door by a man who would not say why he wanted her behind that door, and the door had been locked from the other side, though not against her. She considered this, standing in the dark she carried with her, and decided 3 things. The first, she would not ask him anything tonight that she could not afford to have answered. The second, she would not leave in the morning. Not until she had listened to him read, listened to him walk, listened to him eat, and listened to the name he had said when he thought he was only saying it to himself. The third, whatever he had meant by 15 years, it was going to be the whole of his story, and he had chosen, for reasons she did not yet know, to tell it by degrees. She went to bed and slept the sleep of a person who had spent 9 years learning how to sleep in strange rooms. She woke to the sound of a piano. For a long moment, she did not know where she was. The mattress was wrong, too firm, too wide, and the pillow was unfamiliar, and the air had the warm, worn scent of a house she had not slept in yesterday. Then she remembered. A wheel on Fleet Street, a hand at her waist, a doorway, a voice that said 15 years to itself, and thought she had not heard. Grosvenor Square, the Rose Room, The unlit mirror she could not use. It was 2 stories below her and through at least one closed door, and it was being played badly, not by a child, but by a grown man who had once known how to play and had stopped. The right hand was competent, the left hand was angry. She sat up in the borrowed bed, pulled the wrap around her, and listened. The piece was the opening of the Appassionata. He did not get past the first page. The playing stopped mid-phrase, a silence that had weight in it. Then the lid of the instrument was closed, not gently, and footsteps moved away into the hall. Isolde sat and counted to 100. And she rose, dressed in the borrowed clothes a maid had left, a simple, dark gown, fitted better than it had any business fitting for a garment chosen at night, and went to find him. Mrs. Penrose found her first. "Miss, the Duke asks whether you would join him for breakfast." "Yes." "The small dining room, miss. I will show you." She was shown. Edmund Ashworth rose when she entered. She heard the scrape of a chair and the specific rustle of a man standing out of habit rather than performance, and she was placed into a chair across from him, and a cup of chocolate was put into her hand, and a plate of buttered bread. He wished her good morning, and she returned it, and he asked whether she had slept. She had, she said, and thanked him. He said he had not, but that was no fault of the house. She lifted the chocolate to her lips. She did not taste it at once. She heard him fold his napkin and set it beside his plate, in the particular slow motion of a man who had been composing a sentence before she entered the room and had now decided not to say it. "You play Beethoven in the small hours, Your Grace." "I do." "Not well." "No, I have not played well for some time." "Why the Appassionata? It is not a piece for a sleepless night. It is a piece for a man who has made a decision and is not sure he is glad of it." The quiet that followed was the stillness she was becoming accustomed to, the stillness of a man with something in his chest that was trying to get out and whose training would not let it. She was very forward, he observed. She was very blind, she told him. She had learned to ask what other women pretended not to notice. It was a defense. If she did not ask a question, she did not get an answer. And if she did not get an answer, she was left guessing. And she had spent too much of her life guessing. That was fair, he said. Why then, she asked, had he brought her here? He did not answer at once. She did not repeat the question. One of her mother's lessons, from the time before the fever. Ask once, then wait. Repetition weakens a question. When he did speak, it was not the answer. It was a circle around the answer. He would like, he said, to offer her a position in his household. Not as a guest, as a member of it. She asked him, quite level, what he wished her to do. Whatever she wished to do, he said, that she could do. The absurdity of the offer was itself an answer of sorts. She let it stand. That was generous, she said, and also, she observed, not a position. A servant did specific work for a specific wage. If she was not a servant, she was a dependent. And a dependent was either a relation, a ward, or a mistress. She was none of those. Which, then, was he proposing to make her? A ward, he said, if she would accept it. She reminded him that she was 24. He was, he said, aware. A woman of 24, she observed, was not a ward. A woman who has lived in a London inn at the sufferance of a landlord is, in every practical sense, whichever thing a respectable man chooses to call her. I am choosing to call you a ward. Society will accept the word if I use it in front of society. My house will accept it if I use it in front of my house. If you prefer another word, give it to me. Why me? He did not answer that either. He had not answered it the night before. She let the silence stand. A clock on the mantel marked the time. A cup was lifted. A cup was set down. A servant removed a plate. Outside, very faintly, the sound of a horse being walked along the square. Miss Carey, he said at last, I owe you an honest answer to that question. I do not have one to give you today. I will tell you this much. I knew your name before you said it. I have been looking for you for 15 years. Will you stay, on that much, until I can bring myself to tell you the rest?" The cup in her hand did not tremble. She had trained her hands not to tremble decades ago, in a schoolroom where her cousins had laughed at a blind girl spilling tea. 15 years, she said. 15 years. You said it in the carriage, last night. You thought I had not heard it. I had hoped you had not. Will you stay? She set the cup down very carefully in its saucer. The china made a small, precise sound. Yes, Your Grace, she said. I will stay. On the condition that when you tell me the rest, you tell me all of it. Not the version I can be protected from. The whole. Agreed, he said. She added one more thing, quietly. If she did not like the whole, she would leave. He knew, he said. He was not eating. She heard that his plate had not moved. She heard, too, that his hand was resting on the edge of the table. Flat, steady. The hand of a man holding himself still by main force. Good morning, Your Grace, she said again, and she picked up her cup. She remained. That was the sentence she used with herself in the small hours, when her mind wanted to ask why. She remained. It was a verb without a reason, and she did not require a reason from it. She had lived for 15 years in places she had not chosen, and on terms she had not set. And she had learnt that the woman who required her circumstances to make sense before she accepted them was the woman who went hungry. Ashworth House had fed her. Ashworth House was warm. The man in it owed her nothing she had asked him for, and wished her nothing she had refused. She remained. The first week she spent learning the house the way she learned any new house, by walking it until her cane had counted its corners. 32 paces from the front door to the library, 14 from the library to the music room, 9 steps up the staircase, the rose room, the green room, the blue room, the dining room, the small parlour, the large parlour, the morning room. She learnt the scent signatures: beeswax in the library, lemon oil in the music room, cedar in the linens, rosemary somewhere in the kitchen corridor that meant she was close to the servants' stair. She learnt that Mrs. Penrose moved in a specific rustle of bombazine, that the under-butler hummed under his breath, that a new maid called Sarah had a slight limp on her right foot, and that Edmund Ashworth, the Duke of Ashworth, walked with the tread of a man 2 stone heavier than he was, because he placed his feet deliberately. She learnt the library by touch. Every book on the lower 3 shelves was known to her within 10 days. He read to her in the evenings. She did not have to ask. The first night she had said, in passing, that she missed the sound of Milton, and the next evening a chair had been pulled up to the fire for her, and a copy of Paradise Lost had been opened in his lap. He read well, better than he played. He had the trick of making a long line go all the way to its end without hurrying the middle. On the 4th evening, she noted that he had read her the line about the gulf twice. He liked it, he said. He liked the silence at the end of it. The way the poet heard it and let it stay. The way most men could not bear to leave a silence alone. She said he left silences alone very well himself. He had had practice, he said. She smiled. She had not smiled often in the last 15 years. Tell me something true, Your Grace. That is a large request for a Tuesday evening. Something small, then. He considered. The fire hissed against a damp log. A coal settled. Somewhere in the back of the house, a clock that had always run a minute fast struck 9, and was answered a moment later by a clock in the hall that had always run a minute slow. I had a brother, he said. Had? He was lost when I was 13, and he was 11. How? By violence, Miss Carey. I will tell you the rest when I can. She did not press. Repetition weakens a question. But she set that answer aside, on the shelf in her mind where she was building him a portrait. I had a mother, she offered in return. She was lost when I was 14. Of fever. I was with her. He said, quietly, that he was sorry. She thanked him. The fire hissed again. Neither of them disturbed it. He read another page. She listened to his voice and to the small, careful adjustments of his body in the chair. And she thought, for the first time in years, I am not afraid, and I do not know him. And both are true. The fire in the library had a habit she'd come to catalogue. It burned steadiest from 9 until 10. At 10, a servant renewed the basket, and a draught from the door spoiled the flame for a quarter of an hour. By a quarter past, it had recovered, and for the next hour it was the quietest fire she had ever sat beside. She had begun to know Edmund Ashworth's evenings by the behaviour of his library fire. He did not disturb his servants. He did not call for anything. He did not pace. He sat across from her and read, and at a precise moment near the top of each hour, set his book on his knee and looked at her. She could hear the specific rustle of a man looking, for the length of a single, unhurried breath. He did not know she was counting the breaths. She had not told him. She had begun, in the dark of her own bed, to count them again before she slept. The Rose Room, she had discovered, was not Rose at all. Sarah the maid had told her this on the second morning, in passing, with the half-guilty tone of a servant revealing an intimacy of the house. The room had been called Rose because it had, for most of its history, been hung with rose silk. The rose silk had been taken down, Sarah said, 5 years ago, and had not been replaced. The room now was green, the dark, forest green of a library chair. Isolde had not known this. No one had thought to tell her. She had laughed, quietly, when she heard it, because it was the first thing about this house that had been funny. She put her palm against the nearest wall that afternoon. The silk was cool and faintly nappy. The warp ran one way, the weft the other. It was very good silk, unfrayed at the seams she could reach. A house that redid its walls 5 years ago in forest green silk, and did not bother to rename the room, was a house whose master did not notice rooms. A house whose master noticed only one thing, she thought, and had been noticing it for a long time. She found the piano on the 6th morning. She had been in the music room before, to count paces, but she had not let herself touch the instrument. It was not hers, and she had learnt in her mother's cousins' houses that a blind woman who touched another woman's piano was called presuming. But this was not another woman's piano. This was a house that had opened itself to her, and this was an instrument that a man had abandoned mid-piece in the small hours. She felt for the keyboard. She opened the lid. She sat. Her fingers remembered more than she had remembered herself. She had played until she was 9, before the fever, and she had played by ear for the 9 years after, in boarding houses and back parlours where the family had let her. And she had never played in a room where the walls were so kind. She began with the piece he had abandoned. She could not read the sheet, but she had known the Appassionata when she was a child, and her hands, old as her hands felt tonight, had kept most of it. She played the first page through. She did not fight the left hand. She did not fight anything. She let it be what it wanted to be. When she reached the end of the first movement's exposition, she stopped. Not because she could not continue, because she had heard him in the doorway. She asked how long he had been there. Since she began, he said. That was very long. He had not wished to interrupt. She observed, dryly, that he played this piece badly and she played it well. It was an odd meeting, sir. It was, he agreed. He did not come further into the room. She felt that, the way he was holding himself in a doorway, exactly as he had held himself in a doorway the first night she had walked into this house. My mother taught me, she said, without looking toward him. Looking toward him had no meaning. She was a housekeeper. She had been a governess before she married. She played because her mother had taught her. It is not a line of piano players that is much written about, Your Grace. Who was your mother? Her name was Mary Carey. She was from Kent. The silence in the doorway changed shape. It had been the silence of a listening man. Now it was the silence of a man who had taken a blow to the lung and was deciding whether to let anyone see. "From where in Kent?" he asked. A village she had never seen, she told him. Her mother had refused to name it. They had left, and she had not meant to go back. She had been lost before Isolde could press her. He said, "I see," in the voice of a man saying it to the inside of his own head. She asked whether he was well. He said he was. Forgive him. Would she play the second movement? She played it. He stood in the doorway. He did not come further in, and he did not leave. And when the last note faded, he said nothing for a long time, and then said, "Thank you, Miss Carey," in a voice that had been pulled through a narrow place. His footsteps moved off. She sat at the piano and put her hands in her lap and thought, whatever he is carrying something made of me. The music room was cold when the fire had not been lit. It was a sharp, resinous cold, the wood of the pianoforte drawing in the chill of the walls and giving it back slowly. And she sat inside it for a long while without moving, her hands on the keys, her breath held and released and held again. She heard the long case clock in the hall strike 3/4 past. Somewhere in the kitchen, a copper pan was being scoured. Somewhere in the mews, a horse was being led out for exercise. In between the two sounds, the house settled into the middle hour of its morning. She listened to a coal shift on the hearth across the hall. She listened to a footman open a window and a second footman close it. She listened to her own heart until it had stopped doing the odd, fast thing it had been doing and was back to the steady thing it usually did. She stood. She closed the lid of the pianoforte. She walked to the door, found it, went out into the hall. The second week, she began to be useful. She had not meant to. She had meant to be dignified, decorative, a ward in title. She had told herself at the start of the week that she would sit quietly in the library in the afternoons and accept the reading and the meals and the courtesy, and that she would not intrude herself upon a household that had not asked for her intrusion. She had made that resolution very sincerely on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, she had understood that her resolution was going to be a short one. A ward was a poor match for the kind of mind she had been born with. Her mother had once said, in the voice of a woman who had always been busier than her employers knew, that a Carey woman given a quiet hour would find 6 problems and solve 4 of them before the clock struck, and that the remaining 2 were generally the ones the mistress of the house had been hoping no one would notice. Isolde, sitting in a warm library with nothing to do, had discovered the truth of the observation. By the 10th day, she had identified 3 problems in the household and could not make herself leave them alone. The first was the cook, who disliked the under-butler and had been sending meals to his table over-salted for a month. Isolde heard it in their exchange over the breakfast tray. The cook's voice too bright, the under-butler's too careful. She asked Mrs. Penrose one morning whether Mr. Colby had made an error she could put right. Mrs. Penrose, startled, confessed that he had once failed to pass on a message from the cook's son, who was at sea. Isolde wrote a note to Mr. Colby, had it read aloud to her by a maid, approved it, and had Mrs. Penrose deliver it. Mr. Colby apologized. The salt stopped. The second was the under-steward of the Duke's London property, who had been reading his accounts aloud to the Duke for a fortnight. Isolde sat with them one morning, because she had been in the library when they began, and she had not wanted to be shuffled out. She listened to the recital. After, she asked quietly, "Your Grace, may I ask Mr. Danvers whether the rents he named for the 4 houses in Bloomsbury are the same rents he reported last spring?" "They are not," Mr. Danvers said at once, affronted. "Forgive me, Mr. Danvers. I thought your cadence at those 4 numbers was the cadence of a man reading from memory, rather than from a ledger. I'm in the habit of noticing cadence. If you will say them again, more slowly, we can be sure." He said them again, more slowly. 2 of the 4 were wrong. Mr. Danvers, red in the face, explained. He had been asked by a tenant to hold the increase to a round figure. He had not reported the adjustment. He had not meant to defraud. He would return the difference. The Duke accepted this with a cold civility that left Mr. Danvers very clear on where the cliff edge was, and dismissed him. When the door shut, Edmund was quiet. She could not see his face, but she could hear his breathing. And it was the breathing of a man who had not expected to be saved a considerable sum of money by a blind woman before breakfast. He said, after a moment, that it had been extraordinary. She said it had been ordinary. She had been poor, and poor people listened to rents read aloud the way rich people looked at paintings. Would she, he asked, sit in on his accounts if he asked it of her? She would, she told him, sit in on anything he asked her to, provided he did not use her to prove a point to a man who should have been spoken to privately. That was fair, he said. Then there was the third thing. He asked her what it was. The maid who brought in the coal, she said. Sarah. Sarah walked with a limp because she had a pebble in her left boot, which was too large for her. If someone told the girl she might have a new pair at the house's expense, she would be less tired by 9 o'clock. He was silent for a moment. Then he laughed, a short, astonished sound, as if his own laughter had caught him unprepared. He said he was going to be insufferably glad she had stayed. That was a statement, she told him, that a woman heard and put away to examine later. Examine it, then, he said. She smiled, because her face could not help it. And because her face could not help it, and because she was sitting in a room with a man who could see it, she turned toward the fire, and she did not speak for a little while. The third week, she overheard him weep. It was not an accident. It was not exactly a choice, either. She had gone downstairs at midnight because she could not sleep. A bad night. One of the nights when her mother's face came back to her in fragments she could not assemble. And she had walked the library wall to find a book of sermons that Mrs. Penrose had been reading aloud to her. The library was next to the small study. The small study door had not been shut properly. A draught had caught it. She heard, through the gap, the specific sound of a grown man crying as if he had been alone for an hour and had thought himself still alone. She did not go in. She stood in the dark hall with the book of sermons in her hand, and she listened to Edmund Ashworth weep for someone who was not herself. He wept in a way she recognized, the way a person weeps who has been holding something down for years and has, on a particular night, for a particular reason, stopped holding. She heard a sentence. It was not addressed to her. It was addressed to a boy. She is here, he said. She is here in the house. I have her at last. I cannot tell her yet, Arthur. I am so sorry. I cannot tell her yet. She stood in the dark a long time. Then she turned and went back up the stairs, very carefully, her cane muffled against her skirt. She did not read the sermons that night. She lay on her back in the rose room, and she looked at the dark she carried with her. And she thought of a brother who had died by violence when the man downstairs was 13, and of a woman he had been looking for 15 years, and of a housekeeper who had missed a step on a landing on hearing the name Isolde Carey. And she began, slowly, to assemble a picture. It was not yet a whole picture, but it had edges. The days between the midnight study door and the pendant were days she did not, in later life, often think about. There was no dramatic act in them. There were only small, strange tenderesses whose meanings she could not yet pass. He read to her every evening now, and his voice had begun to do something it had not done before, a thing she recognized from her mother's voice in the last weeks before the fever, a thing she had never thought to hear from a grown man. He was reading to her as if she had been away for a long time and had come home, and he was telling her, by means of a poem, that he had missed her. She did not know how to tell him she had heard it. She did not have the words. She listened. She made tea. She walked the corridors and counted them. In the mornings she had begun to sit with Mrs. Penrose at the kitchen table for the first hour of the day, Because Mrs. Penrose knew things about this household she did not know how to ask for, and because the hand that had tightened on hers on the first night's landing had loosened over 3 weeks into the hand of a woman with a great many held-back sentences. On the morning of the pendant, Mrs. Penrose had asked her, with the particular carefulness of a housekeeper raising a subject out of her station, whether she slept well. Isolde had said, truthfully, that she slept well on most nights, and poorly on the nights when her mother came back to her in pieces. And Mrs. Penrose had been silent, and had then put a second piece of bread on Isolde's plate, and had said, in a voice as level as a shelf, that Mary Carey had been a woman who believed that a child should have an extra piece of bread when her mother was in the air. Isolde had gone still. She had asked, very carefully, whether Mrs. Penrose had known her mother. Mrs. Penrose had said, yes, she had, and that was all she would say this morning, miss. And perhaps, one morning soon, she would say more. She found the pendant 3 days later. He had left it on the library table. He did not leave things in the library. She had been in that library a dozen times, and the table had been bare. But on this morning, she came in to read with him, and she brushed her hand across the wood as she passed, and her fingertip caught on something small and metal and warm from a pocket. She said his name, quietly. Your Grace. He returned hers. There was, she told him, something on the table. Yes, he said. He had been looking at it. He had forgotten. Might she asked. He hesitated. She heard the hesitation. Then she heard him say, very quietly, yes. It will not tell you anything I have not already failed to tell you myself. Yes. Hold it. She lifted it. Silver. Small, no bigger than a guinea. Cool at the rim, warm in the middle. A chain, broken and reknotted. And the shape. She traced the shape with her thumb. A crescent. Not a half moon. A specific crescent. The inner arc longer than the outer, with a notch at one end where the silver had been nicked by something sharp long ago. Her thumb stopped. Her free hand went to her temple. Her fingertips found, under her hair, exactly where they had found it every day of her life since she was 9 years old. The thin, raised line of a scar. Crescent-shaped. Inner arc longer than the outer. A notch at one end, where the skin had not quite knit back together, and had, when it healed, formed a tiny ridge. She lifted the pendant, and laid it gently against her own scar, and she felt, through her fingers, that the two shapes were the same shape. Your Grace, she said. Her voice was very calm. What is this? He said her name, Isolde. She asked again, more quietly, what was this, Edmund? He had never heard her say his name. She had not known she was going to say it. It had come out of her mouth as if it had been waiting there. He did not answer. She heard, instead, that he had put his hands flat on the library table, and that he was looking at his hands. Sit down, she said, and tell me. He sat. She stood, because she could not make herself sit. The pendant in her hand, a thumb on the scar. Tell me, she said again. 15 years ago, said the Duke of Ashworth. I was 13. I was coming home from school with my younger brother, Arthur. Our carriage was stopped on the road from Maidstone, 3 miles from Ashfield, by 4 men. They were hired. They were not told to rob us. They were told to make sure neither of us reached home. Go on. My uncle, my father's younger brother, was the next in line. My father was ailing. He did not survive the winter. If my brother and I had both died that autumn, my uncle would have inherited within 8 weeks. He did not wait for illness. He sent men. Go on. I got Arthur out of the carriage. I was older. I had been taught to run. I made him run. We ran for the stables at Ashfield. We nearly made it. They caught him. I was still 20 paces behind. I saw him fall. He paused. The fire in the grate shifted. A log settled an inch lower. She did not fill the silence. She had learnt that the worst sentences came faster when a room made space for them. A girl pulled me into a grain bin in the tack room. She pulled it shut over me. She stood in front of it. One of the men came into the stable. He had a blade. He asked where I was. She said she did not know. He did not believe her. He struck her. She went down. He looked in the other bins. He did not look in mine. He left. She had told him I had gone the other way before he struck her. I have been told this since. I did not hear it myself. His breath went out of him and came back in unevenly. She heard the specific cadence of a man who had recited this story to himself so many times that saying it aloud to another person was a new and unmanageable experience. I was 9 years old in my own head at that moment, and I stayed in that bin for 2 hours. And when I came out, she was still on the stable floor, alive, but not well. She had taken a blow to the temple. Her mother found us. Her mother lifted her and carried her out, and rode with her as far as a village I could not follow them to. I did not know the name of the village. My father was lost before I could ask him. My uncle claimed the attack had been highwaymen. By the time I was old enough to know otherwise, my uncle was established, and the 2 witnesses, the girl and her mother, were gone. She asked her name, the girl's. Her name, he said, was Isolde. She had been 9. She was the housekeeper's daughter. Her mother was Mary Carey. Isolde had not dropped the pendant. Her hand was closed around it with the grip of someone who was not going to let go. Her mother gave me this pendant, Edmund said, the morning before. She had given it to her daughter for her 9th birthday. It had been struck from silver her own mother had left her. Your mother gave it to you, and you gave it to me, that morning in the yard because I had said I liked the shape. I put it in my pocket. When I came out of the bin, and you were on the floor, and there was... When your mother came for you, I tried to give it back. She told me to keep it until you were well. I have kept it for 15 years. I have been looking for you for 12 of those years. I hired a man. I hired 2. I went to Kent, and I went to London, and I went to Bristol and Bath and Brighton and a dozen towns. Your mother had changed your surname. She had been afraid my uncle would finish the work. She was right to be afraid. I did not find you. And then last night, in Lorraine, in Fleet Street. He stopped. I recognized you, he said. I recognized you before you told me your name. I recognized the shape of your mouth. I recognized the line of your scar under your hair when I was lifting you from the cobble. I recognized your voice as soon as you spoke. I did not know what to do with any of it. I brought you here. I have spent 3 weeks trying to decide how to tell you that I have owed you my life since I was 13, and that I have kept the pendant against my skin every day since, and that I have begun to believe I would never. She said his name once more. He answered. She asked him to sit still a moment. He sat still. She did not move. She stood with the pendant in her left hand and her right hand at her temple, and her face turned toward a window she could not see. And she made her breath obey her, because her breath had understood several things at once, and was attempting to betray her over every one of them. I do not remember any of it, she said. I know. I do not remember your face. I do not remember your brother. I do not remember a stable, or a bin, or a man with a blade. I have a scar I have never explained. I have a mother who refused to name her village. I have a piano I was not taught by a stranger. And I have 15 years of darkness that I have never been able to trace a reason to. I know, Isolde. She asked him not to say her name yet, not yet. He said no, he would not. She breathed. She let the pendant rest in her open palm. He had kept this, she said. He said yes. He had kept her in his pocket for 15 years. Yes. And he could not tell her, she said, because he had thought she would feel that he was owed. Yes. He was, she said, an idiot, Edmund Ashworth. A breath went out of him that was almost laughter and was not entirely laughter. Yes. Listen to me. I am listening. I am not a debt. I am not a rescue. I am not a pendant. I am not a scar. I am not the girl in the hayloft. I do not remember the girl in the hayloft, and I will not be asked to be her for your comfort. I am Isolde Carey, and I am 24 years old, and I am a blind woman who has lived in 9 cities and earned her bread at a piano in 6 of them. I am a woman who sat across a breakfast table from you because you pulled me out from under a wheel. That is all. Do you understand that? Yes. Now, tell me the rest of it. The rest? Your uncle. He is alive. He is alive. Where? London. 15 minutes walk from this door. His house is in Hanover Square. He is a guest, on occasion, at mine. We have not spoken without witnesses in 12 years. I could not prove what he did. I could only watch him. Watch him. Yes. Your Grace, Edmund, do you intend to let him die in his bed? He did not answer at once. When he did, his voice was the voice she had heard in the study, at midnight, speaking to a dead boy. I have spent 12 years preparing not to. I have never found the thing that would finish it. I cannot accuse a peer of the realm of hiring murderers without a witness who can speak in a court. The men are dead. He is not careless. The girl who could have named him was a 9-year-old blind child, and her mother would not have been believed. And her mother, your mother, was dead before I was old enough to look for her properly. And now? Now, he said. The girl is 24 and is sitting in my library with the pendant in her hand, and she has already told me she does not remember. I do not remember, Isolde said, but I hear, and I've been told that I hear very well. Bring him to this house. Let me sit in a room with him. Let me listen to him. If there is anything to find in his voice, I will find it. He began her name, and she stopped him. She would not have him say it now with that softness, she told him. Not today. Today she needed the man who had run for the stables. Was he that man? A silence. Then, quietly, he was. Then begin, she said. He began. He did not bring his uncle to the house at once. Isolde saw the sense in that. A woman of her description had been seen in London, installed at Ashworth House as a ward, her presence whispered about in the clubs. Lord Henry Ashwell, the Duke's uncle, would already be aware. To stage a meeting immediately would alert him. Instead, Edmund began the slower work. A dinner at a friend's house where the uncle would be present. An invitation that could not be refused without insult. The careful setting out of a trap that did not look like a trap. For Isolde, the days narrowed to one question. When she heard his voice, when she heard the voice of the man who had ordered her childhood, would she know it? She did not know if she would. She practiced. Mrs. Penrose, under instructions, found excuses to bring men into Isolde's presence. The wine merchant, the physician, a visiting clergyman, Mr. Danvers from the accounts. Isolde listened to them with her eyes closed. It made no difference. And she catalogued them. The wine merchant had a wet sibilant. The physician breathed too loudly between phrases. The clergyman dropped his voice at the end of every sentence, as if he were putting each one into a box. She did not recognize any of them. She did not tell Edmund this. She told him only what she had learnt about each man, and he did not press. The dinner was 10 days after the library. It was held at the house of Lord Carteret, a friend of Edmund's father. Lord Carteret's wife was, Mrs. Penrose had told Isolde, a kind woman, slightly deaf, who would not ask questions she was not answered. The house was in Cavendish Square. The dinner was set for 8. The company would include the uncle and two of the uncle's allies from the Lords, and a cousin of Edmund's who had been at Eton with him and was considered one of the few men he did not dislike. Isolde dressed in grey silk. She had asked for grey. She did not want to be looked at. She wanted to listen. Grey had another virtue she did not name aloud. Grey was the colour a man underestimated. A woman in blue would be observed. A woman in rose would be admired or dismissed. A woman in grey would be recorded as a small, quiet shape at the edge of the conversation, and men would forget she was present and say things in front of her they would not have said across a card table. She had learnt this in 9 cities. She had never before had a reason to use what she had learnt against a man whose face she would not see. The carriage ride to Cavendish Square was almost silent. Edmund sat across from her and did not speak. She heard him adjust the cuff of his coat once. She heard his boots place themselves square on the floor of the carriage. She heard him begin, 3 separate times, to offer her an encouragement and stop before he spoke it, because he had understood, she was sure he had understood, that a woman in her particular state did not need to be encouraged. A woman in her particular state needed to be left to count her breaths. She heard Lord Henry Ashwell cross a room before she was presented to him. She heard a voice among the other voices, and she knew, with a certainty she had not known she possessed, that she had heard that voice before. She did not know where, she did not know when, but a part of her that was older than she was, a part of her that was under her scar and not in her memory, recoiled. She was presented. He took her hand. "My dear Miss Carey." "Lord Ashwell." "I have heard so much. My nephew has been very attentive. It is a pleasure to meet the young woman who has, as it were, stirred the water of our household." "I hope to have stirred it for the better, my lord." "I am certain you have. I am certain you have." She listened. He spoke with a careful, cultivated warmth. There was something underneath it, a dryness, a scrape, the way a man's throat sounds who has done most of his arguing in small rooms. Not the voice she had thought she would hear, not a voice she could put to a stable, but her pulse would not slow. She moved through the dinner. She was placed between Lord Carteret and a cousin of Edmund's. Across the table, Lord Henry spoke of hunting, of a horse, of a piece of land in Devon that he was considering. He did not speak to her again until the fruit. Then he said across the table, in a voice that was still warm and still dry, "Miss Carey, tell me, do you find London greatly altered since you last knew it?" The room was silent for half a second too long. She heard the silence. She heard that Edmund, at the far end of the table, had not moved. "I have not lived long in London, my lord," she said evenly. "Not long enough to have known it and found it altered." "Ah, forgive me. I had formed an impression from my nephew that you and he were acquainted of long standing." "We are acquainted of 2 months, my lord." "Indeed. Then I stand corrected." "You were kind to ask." "Not at all." The fruit went around. She listened to him the rest of the evening. She listened to him laugh. She listened to him speak to servants. She listened to him speak to Lady Carteret, who was slightly deaf, which meant he spoke louder. She listened for a particular sound, not a word, a shape of a sentence, a cadence under pressure. She did not find it. She did not find it. And yet her shoulders would not come down from her ears, and her right hand, under the table, had closed on the napkin hard enough to bruise her fingers. The drive home was the longest 15 minutes of her adult life. She sat with her hands folded very tight in her lap, and she heard the carriage wheels on the wet street, and she tried to assemble what she knew. Her body had recognized him. Her body had gone into the pasture it went into when it was 9 years old and had been told not to be seen. Her body was not mistaken. Her body was not, in her experience, ever mistaken. But her ear, her trained, careful ear, the one she had made a livelihood of for 9 years, had not found in Lord Henry's voice the specific shape of the voice she had heard once in a stable. She did not know why. She would have to think about it. She would have to sit in the dark and think about it for a long time. And she was going to have to do it with Edmund waiting on an answer she was not yet ready to give him. On the drive home, Edmund waited until they were halfway across the square. "Well?" She said his name. He asked her to tell him. It was him, she said. She did not yet know how she knew, but it was him. She woke that night to the sound of a hand on her doorknob. It was 3 hours past midnight. The hand was gloved. She heard it. She heard the glove on the brass, a quieter sound than a bare hand, but not silent. She heard a pause. She heard the latch tested and released. She sat up and she did not speak. Her fingers found the bell pull she had had moved to the head of her bed a week ago. She waited. The knob turned. She pulled the bell. The bell in her room was connected, in the particular way of old houses, to a bell in the housekeeper's corridor, and to a second bell in the Duke's valet's room. Both rang. A man in the hall swore. The door of her room opened. She heard him cross the threshold. She heard him take 1 step, 2, 3. She heard the change in the air that was the shape of a body coming at her. And under her hand, on the side of her bed, she had a china water jug. She had put it there the first night she had slept in this house. She had put it there every night since. She threw it. It struck him. She heard it strike. She heard it break. She heard him curse. And the curse was a word he had not meant to say, in a voice that was not the voice of Lord Henry Ashwell, but was a voice she had heard at dinner, across a table, speaking to a footman about the wine. A servant. A man of his uncle's, whose face she had never known she knew. Footsteps in the corridor. Edmund, the valet. A lamp. The intruder was down. The lamp showed him, Edmund told her later, as a tall, broken-nosed man who had worked in Lord Henry's house for 11 years, and whose name was Carter, and who had been sent that night to make a blind woman into an unfortunate accident. Isolde was sitting on the edge of her bed, a cut across her left forearm, shallow, china in her hand. Her other hand, somehow, closed around the pendant at her throat. She did not remember putting the pendant on that night. She had begun to wear it since Edmund had given it back to her, but she did not remember putting it on. She was breathing. Her breath was very strange. It was coming in the pattern of a breath she had not breathed since she was 9 years old. He said her name. She said his. He said she was bleeding. She told him it was not badly, that he was not to send for the physician yet, and that he should sit on the edge of her bed. He sat. The valet had taken Carter. The hall was full of footmen. Mrs. Penrose was in the doorway with her dressing gown inside out. "Edmund," she said, "listen to her." He was listening. When he was at the threshold of the door, when he put his hand on the knob before he opened it, he said something under his breath. 1 sentence. He did not know he was saying it. He said it to himself. Men say things to themselves when they are about to do a thing they do not wish to do. He asked what the man had said. She told him, "Don't let the girl see." Edmund did not speak. "I have heard that sentence before," Isolde said. "I have heard it in a stable. I have heard it at 15 years' distance, and I was 9 when I heard it the first time. And I have been hearing it tonight in my sleep without knowing what I was hearing. Your uncle said it to the man with the blade. Your uncle said it before he sent him into the tack room. Carter heard it tonight because Carter has been in your uncle's employ for 20 years, and has heard him say it so many times it has become his own sentence. Your uncle taught him to think that sentence as he crossed a threshold. Do you understand me?" "I understand you." She told him to bring the man to her. "Tomorrow," he said. "No," she said. "The day after." She needed a day to plan, Then bring him. In this house. In this library. She would make him speak that sentence in a room with witnesses. And when he did, they would have him. Did he agree? Yes, he said. She said his name again. He answered. She told him not to look at her now, with the face he was making. What face? He asked. I cannot see your face, but I hear it in your breathing. It is the face of a man who is deciding to do violence himself tonight, and I am asking you not to. I am asking you to trust that the girl in the hayloft, grown up, knows how to trap her own man. Do you agree? A long pause. Then, I agree. Good, she said. He was to have Mrs. Penrose bring her hot water. The cut was shallow. He was to sit there a moment longer. He sat. She put her right hand on top of his, where it lay on the bed. She had never touched him before. He had handed her to the carriage. He had helped her through doorways. His arm had been offered to hers 100 times. But she had not laid her hand, of her own motion, on his. His hand beneath hers was very warm and very still, and she felt, under his knuckles, a faint tremor he had not been able to master. Edmund, she said, very low. He answered. She asked him not to fall before the day after tomorrow. Did he agree to that as well? He agreed. She kept her hand on his. Lord Henry Ashwell came to Ashworth House on Thursday at 3 o'clock for tea. He had been invited with a note of deliberate casualness, Edmund's own hand. A matter to discuss concerning a cousin's debt. The Duke would be pleased if his uncle would come alone. The Duke's ward would be present, as she had made some useful observation about the cousin's affairs. The note was delivered by a footman who had been with the family for 25 years and could be trusted not to speak of it. Isolde had spent the previous day in preparation. She had walked the library twice at first light, setting the chairs to the exact positions she wanted them. Her own high-backed chair at a precise angle to the fire, so that a man sitting opposite would be placed with the window behind him and the light, such as it was on a grey autumn afternoon, full on his face. She did not need to see his face. She needed him to feel that his face could be seen, that there was a woman in the room who might, at any moment, choose to look at him, and that his composure depended on his forgetting that she could not. She had walked to the hall, had listened to the long case clock chime the hour, had asked Mrs. Penrose to have the hall swept clean enough to give no footfall cover, and had given the footmen their orders. She had, in her mother's phrase, laid the table. Lord Henry came. He was shown into the library. Isolde was seated in a high-backed chair by the fire. She had dressed in pale grey again, because she had found that grey made people underestimate her. Her hair was drawn back with a ribbon. The pendant hung at her throat. Her cane rested against the side of the chair. Edmund rose. Lord Henry bowed over Isolde's hand. A maid brought tea. The maid was new. The maid was, in fact, not a maid at all. She was a clerk from Lincoln's Inn, who had been paid by Edmund to take down shorthand of the entire conversation from a screen in the corner. There was also a second man in an alcove, unseen, taking a fair copy. There was also a magistrate, whom Isolde did not know by sight, who had been invited to wait in the blue room across the hall on an unrelated matter, and whose hearing was excellent. The trap was set. "My dear Edmund," said Lord Henry, easy and smooth, "and Miss Carey, I understand you have been assisting with the household's affairs." "I have, my lord." "Very good of you. Tea?" "Thank you." She heard him take his cup. She heard him sit in the chair opposite hers. She heard the tiny creak of good leather under a man of his weight. She heard the ring he wore on his right hand tap once, absent-mindedly, against the saucer. She let him drink. "Uncle," said Edmund, "I asked you here for several reasons. I will come to the cousin's debt in a moment. There is another matter I wish to raise. I have been reviewing the accounts of Ashfield from the autumn of my father's death. I have found certain entries I do not understand." "Indeed?" "Indeed." A payment, for example, to 4 men whose names are not household names and whose services are not described. They were paid 2 weeks before the carriage incident on the Maidstone Road. Lord Henry's cup did not quite reach his saucer. It paused an inch above it. Isolde heard the pause. "Edmund," said Lord Henry, "that is a very old matter." "It is. It is 15 years old. I have had 15 years to read over it. I have had leisure, in the last 2 months, to reread certain of the household ledgers, and I have found a page which was not in the copy my father had at his deathbed. A page of disbursements. The page was bound into the master ledger after he died." "By whom?" "By you." A silence. A long silence. Isolde did not fill it. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and she listened. "Edmund," said Lord Henry, and his voice had changed a little. Not in warmth, he was still warm, but a very slight dryness had come into his throat that had not been there before. "I did indeed review the accounts after your father's death. It was my duty as guardian to do so. If a page was added, it was added because the household had not kept proper records, and I caused the records to be rendered proper. By adding a page of payments to 4 men who never received household wages. By ensuring that outstanding obligations were recorded. To men who were paid, in my father's name, 2 weeks before his sons were attacked on the road from Maidstone." "Edmund, you are proposing an extraordinary interpretation." "I am proposing," said Edmund, "the only interpretation the entries support. I am not asking you to confess to it, uncle. I am asking you to sit with it. I am asking you to sit across from me in this room and sit with it." Silence. Isolde listened. She was listening for the sentence. She was listening for the shape of it, the cadence, the little dryness she had not placed at the Carteret dinner, but had placed 3 hours after midnight, when a hired man had put his hand on her door. "Miss Carey," said Lord Henry abruptly, "may I trouble you for the fire? I find myself chilled." "The fire is beside you, my lord." "Ah, of course." A log was lifted, a poker set down. "Miss Carey," Lord Henry said again, "I beg your forgiveness if my nephew has put you in an awkward position. Such matters ought not to be discussed before a young woman who is not of the family." "It is no trouble, my lord." "You are very composed." "I was raised to be." "By?" "My mother." "A good woman, no doubt." "A very good woman. She was a governess before she married, and housekeeper to a great family in Kent after she was widowed." A very, very small pause. Smaller than most men would have marked. Isolde marked it. She marked it, and she counted it, and she set it down with the others. "Indeed." "Indeed, my lord. You may know of her. Her name was Mary Carey." The pause now was not small. "Mary," said Lord Henry. "Carey." "Yes." "I am afraid I do not recall." "You will not. She left the county 15 years ago. She left it with a blind child whom she had nearly lost to a blow to the temple. They left for the West, and then for London, and then for Bristol, and then for London again. They were not pursued in the end. A man tried for a little while, and then the men he trusted became unreliable, and he gave up, and told himself the child would die in any case. She did not die. She is sitting in this chair." A long, long silence. "Edmund," said Lord Henry, "what is this?" "This," said Isolde, before Edmund could answer, "is a conversation, my lord, in which I am going to ask you to do one small thing for me. It is a trifle. You may find it beneath your dignity. But I'm a blind woman, and you will indulge me." "Of course, Miss Carey." "I should like you to say a single sentence. I should like you to say, 'Don't let the girl see.'" A silence that did not move. "I beg your pardon." "Say it. Please. Don't let the girl see." Say it exactly as you would say it if you were speaking to a servant in the hall. Miss Carey, this is an exceedingly strange request. It is. Indulge me. I cannot imagine the purpose. Say it. No, Miss Carey, I will not. Why not, my lord? He did not answer. She waited. He did not answer. She waited. He did not answer. She let the silence rest. My lord, she said at last, and her voice was still calm and still kind. You have said those words before. She let that lie on the carpet between them for a moment. The clerk behind the screen in the corner was writing. Her fingers could almost hear the nib. You said them 15 years ago, in the stable yard at Ashfield, to a man named Corbin, who was the first of the 4 you hired to meet a carriage on the Maidstone Road. You said them before you sent him into the tack room to hunt the boy. I heard you from the hayloft above. I was 9 years old. I've been playing there since morning. I climbed down when I heard the boy running, and I pulled him into a grain bin before Corbin came in after him. Corbin did not find me in the hayloft. He did not find the boy in the bin. You had sent Corbin in alone because you did not want me, or any other child of the house, to see your face. You did not know I had already heard you. I was a housekeeper's daughter, with a ribbon in my hair. Lord Henry's cup made the tiniest sound against its saucer. He had set it down, or tried to. The saucer had not quite been where he thought it was. I have not known what I heard until 3 nights ago, when your man Carter said those same words at the threshold of my door. He said them under his breath, because you have said them in his hearing often enough to teach him to say them. Your man Carter is in custody now. He will speak. He is already speaking. Your books have been copied. This conversation has been copied. There is a magistrate in the blue room across the hall. She did not move. She did not raise her voice. She was, Edmund would say later, more terrible in her stillness than any magistrate in the kingdom. When he comes into this room, he will ask you 3 questions, and you will answer them. You have always been a careful man, and careful men answer questions when they are cornered, because silence is an answer too. I am not asking you to confess. I am asking you to know that you are finished. Do you understand me, my lord? He did not speak. My lord, do you understand me? Yes. Thank you. She did not look toward Edmund. She did not need to. She heard that he had not moved. Edmund, she said, call the magistrate. Edmund rose. He walked to the library door. He opened it. Sir, he said, if you will. The magistrate came. He was a small, elderly man with a limp from the Peninsula campaign. He walked with the measured gait of someone who had been brought in for an unlikely afternoon's work and had decided, some time before, to let none of his surprise show on his face. He looked at Lord Henry in the leather chair. He looked at the Duke. He looked at the blind woman in grey silk sitting by the fire. He bowed to her, slightly, as if she were the room's senior occupant. She heard the bow. She inclined her head 1/4 of an inch in return. Behind the screen in the corner, the clerk turned his page. The fair copy in the alcove was underway. The footman in the hall had closed the house against departures. The doors of the blue room and the dining room and the library had been, at a signal she had arranged with Mrs. Penrose that morning, quietly locked from the outside by a man who had been told only that Lord Henry was not to be permitted to leave before the magistrate had finished with him. It was, Isolde thought, as neat a trap as she had set in her life. It was, if she were honest, the only trap she had ever set. She sat very still, and she listened. There are accounts of that afternoon that were printed later, in the journals that followed such affairs. None of them mention the blind woman in grey silk, because Edmund would not allow her name in them. He paid, quietly, the editors who would otherwise have printed it, and the name did not appear. The case was built on the ledger page, on Carter's testimony, on a second servant of Lord Henry's who came forward when it became clear the wind had turned, and on the statement of a housekeeper at Ashfield who had kept, for 15 years, a note in a locked box describing what she had cleaned from a stable floor the morning after Arthur Ashworth had not come home. Lord Henry Ashwell was arrested. He was tried. He was convicted. What happened afterwards to a peer of the realm convicted of such a thing is not a subject a story concerns itself with, and Isolde Carey did not, in later years, speak of it. She had not wanted his face, and she had not wanted his end, and she had been given, in place of both, the freedom of a library and the silence of a man who had kept a pendant in his pocket for 15 years. The weeks after the arrest were very quiet. The house settled in a way it had not settled before. The servants, who had all of them been in the Duke's employ long enough to know the shape of his uncle's shadow, walked through the rooms in the week that followed with the slow, amazed deliberateness of people who have been told, after a long illness in the family, that the illness is over. Sarah, the maid, began to sing in the back stair, very softly, a tune Isolde did not know, but could hear her learning. Mrs. Penrose, on the morning after, brought Isolde her coffee with a small posy of late roses laid across the saucer, and did not explain them. Edmund was harder to read in those weeks. He had done what he had been, without admitting it to himself, preparing for 15 years to do, and the body of a man who has finished a long task does not immediately know what to do next. He walked in the garden. He rode in the park. He sat at the pianoforte without opening it. He read to her in the evenings, as he had done before, but his voice had changed. The specific underwater quality it had carried in the first 3 weeks was gone, and in its place was something she could not name for several days, until she found the right word for it. Relief. He read like a man relieved. It was the first time in her acquaintance with him that his breath, when he was still, had not been the breath of a man holding something down. On the 5th evening after the arrest, he had, without explanation, handed her a small box. Inside was a thin gold chain. The broken silver chain of the pendant had been taken off, and a gold one substituted. The pendant itself was unchanged. He had said only, "It should be worn on something that will not break." She had let him fasten it at the back of her neck. She had felt his hands shake for the space of 3 breaths, and steady for the 4th. Neither of them had spoken of it afterwards. He proposed in the garden. It was an unremarkable afternoon. October had been kind. The leaves were in their last colour, and a wren was making a scene in a hawthorn. Isolde was walking beside him with her hand on his arm, not on a cane. She had begun, since the week of the trial, to leave the cane in the hall when they walked together. She would not have done it with another man. She did it with him because his arm was unfailingly steady, and because a blind woman's dignity is maintained less by a cane than by the confidence of the person beside her. And she had found, in the end, that he could be confident for 2 without being officious for 1. He stopped at the sundial. "Isolde. Edmund. I'm going to say something. If you wish me not to, stop me now." "I do not wish to stop you." "I'm going to ask you to marry me. I'm going to ask it in the poorest way a duke has ever asked anything. I'm not going to kneel. Your hand is already on my arm, and if I went down on one knee, I would pull you with me and embarrass us both." A leaf came down between them, very slowly, and landed on the sundial. She heard the small, dry scrape of its edge on the stone. "I'm going to say that I have loved you since a morning in a stable yard when you were 9 and I was 13. I've loved you since I recognized the line of your scar under your hair in a carriage on Fleet Street. I've loved you since you played the second movement of the Appassionata in my music room and made me stand in the doorway because I could not bear to come in. I have loved you since you corrected my understeward's accounts over breakfast. I've loved you since you put your hand on mine when you were bleeding from a cut you had made me promise to ignore, and told me not to fall before Thursday." His voice had, by now, the quality of a man speaking from underwater. It was the voice, she thought, of a man who had not been allowed to say a true thing in many years, and was finding with each word that his throat still remembered how. I love you. I would like you to consent to marry me. If you will not, I will ask you again in 2 months. If you will not then, I will ask you again in a year. If at any point in the next 10 years you tell me I am not to ask again, I will not ask again. But I will love you as long as the pendant is in any pocket of mine, which is to say, always. That is what I wanted to say. She did not answer at once. She turned her face toward him, toward where she had located him by breath and warmth, and she let the silence be what it wanted to be. The wren in the hawthorn made a last, scandalized remark, and went off about its own business. Edmund Ashworth, she said. Isolde, you are going to listen to me now. You are not going to interrupt. I am listening. I will marry you. I will marry you in 6 weeks, in the chapel at Ashfield, with Mrs. Penrose crying, and Sarah the maid in her new shoes, and the wren, if he is still in business, reading the banns. I will marry you on 3 conditions, which I will name now, and which you will accept now, and which you will not forget. Name them. The first. I will not be a duchess who is pitied. I am not to be spoken of as the blind duchess in your house, or in any house I enter by your arm. If anyone attempts it in my hearing, you will correct them, once, in front of me, so that I hear the correction. If they attempt it again, you will close the door against them. Agreed? Agreed. The second. I will run this household, all of it. I will not pretend to be unable to, and I will not allow a steward or a cousin or a visiting aunt to persuade you to manage it in my stead because I am blind. Mrs. Penrose and I will work together. Your accounts and I will work together. I will know the names of every tenant at Ashfield by their voices by Christmas. And if that is eccentric, it is eccentric. Agreed? Agreed. The third. Yes. You will never again keep a thing from me because you are trying to protect me. You will not spare me a difficult answer. You will not hold back a bad letter. You will not read me an easier page. When your brother Arthur comes into your mind in the small hours, you will come up the stairs and wake me, and you will tell me about him, and I will listen. And I will not, in any hour of any day, be less than the woman who saved you from a grain bin. Agreed? A pause. His breathing caught once and steadied. Agreed. Then yes, Edmund. She put her hand against his cheek. She found the line of his jaw and the corner of his mouth, and the smile there that she had heard 100 times in his voice, and had not, until now, felt. He turned his face into her palm, and held it there for one long moment, and she felt, through her fingers, that his eyes had closed. Isolde. Yes. I am going to kiss you now. I know. I have been listening to you think about it for 15 paces. He kissed her. The wren, elsewhere, made a great fuss. Autumn had given way to winter, and winter had given way, by degrees, to the cold, uncertain beginnings of a Kentish spring by the time they were married. The weeks between the proposal and the wedding had been busier than either of them had expected. There had been the disposal of Lord Henry's affairs, which Edmund had undertaken with a cold, patient thoroughness that Isolde had admired, even as she had refused to be present for any part of it. There had been the slow, awkward rearrangement of the household at Ashworth House, where Mrs. Penrose and the new mistress-in-waiting had spent a careful fortnight learning the exact shape of each other's authority, and then, to the astonishment of both, discovering that their shapes did not clash. There had been, most unexpectedly, a visit from Edmund's only surviving aunt, a formidable woman of 72, who had taken Isolde's hand on being presented, and had said, without preamble, "My dear, you are not to be pitied. I shall write to my friends accordingly." And had then, to Edmund's horror, stayed for 9 days, and approved of everything. The chapel at Ashfield was small, and had a window of 3 panels in the east end, and she was told, afterwards, that Mrs. Penrose had cried through the entire ceremony. She wore a plain dress, by her own choice. She did not want a gown that would make her look like any other bride. She took his hand, and she said her words, and the rector, who was an old man, pronounced them with the voice of a man who had known Edmund as a boy, and had not expected to see him this happy. She had one request, which she had made a month before. The old housekeeper from Ashfield, who had kept the locked box, was to give her away. The old housekeeper did. The old housekeeper's hand on hers was a hand she had known, she found, without knowing she had known it. It was a hand that had wiped her forehead in a kitchen, long ago, during a fever. The body remembered what the mind had not kept. At the wedding breakfast, Edmund stood beside her and did not make a speech. He said one sentence. He said, "I thank all of you for coming. If you will raise your glasses to my wife." They raised their glasses. Isolde, holding her own up, did not drink at once. She was listening to the particular sound of her husband's breath beside her, which was the breath of a man who had put down something he had carried for 15 years, and who was, at that moment, finding out what it was to stand up straight without it. 6 months later, she was in the library at Ashfield. It was spring. A window was open. The garden smelt of wet earth and the specific, slightly almond smell of the hawthorn in its first flower. A maid's child, a boy of 7, who had lost a parent last winter and had come to live with his aunt in the housekeeper's rooms, was sitting on the rug beside her, with his finger under a line of embossed letters. Isolde was teaching him to read. "That is a C," she said. "Feel the curve. It opens the way a cupped hand opens. Now the next one." "Aye, Mrs." "Yes. Duchess is a long word, and we do not trouble with it between us in this room." "T." "Yes. And what word is that?" "Cat, Mrs." "Yes, cat. And the cat is—" "On the mat," he said solemnly. Then, pleased with himself, "On the mat, Mrs." "Very good." Edmund was in the doorway. She knew he was there. She had heard him come half a minute ago, and she had not interrupted the lesson. She finished the page. She put the boy's hand on the next page and told him to practice the letters by himself. He went off to a corner of the rug, and she heard him mouthing the shapes like a serious small animal. "Edmund." "Isolde." "Come in." He came in. He sat on the settle beside her. The pendant at her throat caught on the fabric of her collar. She lifted it and settled it. He watched her hands. "What are you thinking?" she said. She could hear his thinking. It had a specific sound. "I was thinking," he said, "of a boy in a stable 15 years ago. I was thinking of the bin, and of the girl who pulled the lid over it, and of the voice on the other side of the lid. I was thinking that the girl grew into a woman who has been teaching my tenant's child to read for an hour, and that I have spent half an hour in a doorway watching her, and that I have still not come all the way into the room. I come to doorways easily. I come into rooms harder." "Come all the way in, Edmund." "I am." He was. He had. He sat beside her, close, and she put her hand on the back of his, and for a long moment they did not speak. The boy on the rug, who was now naming the letters of his own name to himself, did not notice them. The hawthorn in the garden loosened another handful of petals into the wet grass. "Edmund?" "Yes." "The bin is empty now." "I know." "Good." He lifted her hand and turned it over and kissed the palm. She did not flinch. She did not, in fact, move at all, except to smile. The small, careful smile of a woman who had not known, for 15 years, that the cost of keeping her mouth straight had been so high. "Edmund?" "Yes." "Read to me. The boy has letters. I have a husband. It is an unreasonably pleasant afternoon." He reached for a book. She heard the spine crack. She heard the boy on the rug still mouthing his letters. She heard, outside, The wren from October. Perhaps the same one, perhaps another. It made no difference. She leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, and she listened. If you have ever been found, after a long time of not being looked for, by someone you did not know was looking, if you have ever been recognized in a moment you thought would pass unnoticed, by a hand that had been waiting for the shape of yours for years, then you know what Isolde knew in the library at Ashfield on an April afternoon, with a boy learning his letters on the rug and a wren in the hawthorn, and a pendant at her throat that had been struck from her grandmother's silver and had gone for 15 years in a stranger's pocket, who was no longer a stranger. Some stories end at the kiss. This one ended earlier, in a stable, and began again later, in a library, and made a long, careful arc between them. It was, in its way, a very small story. 2 people, 1 pendant, a brother who had not come home, an uncle who had been stopped 15 years too late. It was only, in the end, what one blind woman had heard that another person had said, and what one grown man had chosen, 15 years later, not to let alone. Which is to say, it was a love story. They are all love stories, in the end, if you wait long enough for the last room to be walked into. And Isolde, who waited in a library with her husband's hand in hers and a boy reading Cat on the Mat on the rug, would tell you, if you ask her, which no one ever did, because she did not speak much of that autumn in London, that she was, at that particular moment, not blind at all. She could hear everything. If you have ever been lost and found, if you have ever been kept in someone's pocket without knowing, through more years than you can name, leave a word in the comments. Tell me your favorite line. And if you would like another story by this fireside, the bell is to your left. Press it and stay. There is always another chair.